Good evening. This same announcements basically as before spring break. There's money's point as usual due Sunday. Your team elections. So each individual student has to submit this so I can confirm that everybody's in agreement on who's on their two-person teams. So those are due this upcoming Saturday. Just make them due a little earlier so I have some time over the weekend that if there are any unmatched pairs, I can try to get them matched, because a week after that, your algorithm choice will be due. And that is at a few sentences. That'll be a group assignment. Only one individual will have to upload that or fill that in. I think it's just a text box on Canvas. And from there, all I'm looking for at this moment is just what algorithm you're planning on showcasing in your mini project. So you don't have to tell me what you're going to do. You don't have to stick to it. It just has to be a plan. So then shortly after that, then you'll submit a one-pager where you'll have like a paragraph that'll describe the algorithm and show me that you understand how it works, and then a paragraph that'll describe your plan for the experiment or the demo that you're going to do and showcase in your mini project. And so that will come after that. Right now, I'm just looking for that algorithm choice. And again, I don't hold that to you. So you could end up deciding later, but I would at least see that you've got a plan or a backstop that you can move forward with. So that's not due this Saturday, but that'll be due soon after your team member election. So there is posted in the final project module on Canvas, there's a little Google Sheets spreadsheet that you click on that. And students have been doing this. If you're having trouble finding someone to join your team, you can just put your name in there and kind of view it as a little clearinghouse where if you see someone else's name in there, you can reach out to them, see if they still need a team. And then likewise, if they see your name, maybe they'll reach out to you. So that's one way to do that. And usually that ends up getting us most of the way there. So probably about roughly half the class is submitted. So we got, the teams assigned, and so the other half that hopefully this week will knock those out. So then otherwise, there is a mini project 3 and concept check 4 that are due this upcoming Sunday. In the mini projects and concept checks, they do have drop policies, so they'll feel like you have to do them all. Any questions about the admin here? Dates coming forward.
Like a strict requirement.
Yeah, it's 2-person. They just don't have the resources for everybody to do a 1-person team. And once we go to 3-person, then it gets a little diluted. Now, because I think there are actually an even number of students in the class, so we should hopefully be able to do the 2-person. Sometimes I have to have, maybe a 3-person team just because of the numbers, but everyone should assume that they're going to be in a 2-person team. Yep.
How many mini projects are to be done? 3?
I think there are 8 opportunities to do a mini project, and I forget what the drop policy is. I think it's drop 4, drop 5. So, all that's in the syllabus and on campus. Any other questions? All right. So we're wrapping up. This is hopefully the last lecture of the genetic material so that we can then start on physics inspired, so the more thermal inspired algorithms, both and as we move into that unit, we'll see them not only for optimization, but for a number of other applications as well. So for different applications in machine learning and statistics that come from the physics literature. And we'll see as we move forward then into the swarm intelligence side of things, how you see influences from genetic algorithms and from the thermal stuff showing up in the swarm intelligence algorithms and just generally in other algorithms as well. So these are all supposed to give you kind of lenses on which to look at other approaches that people have done to give machines the ability to come up with creative solutions and automate things in efficient ways. Okay, so we mentioned that both multi-objective evolutionary algorithms, which find this Pareto frontier and want to spread things along the Pareto frontier, as well as multimodal optimization, which wants to find all of these modes. Both of them have a need for niching methods, which allow them to preserve diversity. So we introduced the general idea of these niching methods, and then in the last lecture before spring break, we talked about fitness sharing methods. Fitness sharing methods were built roughly around this idea here, which we modeled with the ideal free distribution, that you can take individuals which are nearby other individuals in either genotype space or phenotype space, and you can divide down their fitness by the count of individuals around them. And this will give a density dependent fitness to the selection algorithm. And that density dependent fitness will cause a redistribution of individuals. So you can have a high fitness peak, but if it has lots of individuals on it, the fitness realized by each of those individuals will be low. And so eventually the selection algorithm or the selection operator will start putting individuals in other places. And that dynamic is modeled by the ideal free distribution. We know the equilibrium of the ideal free distribution ends up matching individuals in a way where every individual receives the same, fitness, but the allocation of individuals varies by the quality of those fitness peaks. And so this helps prioritize the high peaks, so all the individuals go there first, and then the intermediate peaks start to get populated after that, and so on and so forth. And so if you have a big enough population, you can cover all of your peaks, but with a smaller population, you cover the high fitness peaks first. And that's the kind of idea there. But fitness sharing ended up computationally to be, it's burdensome. And so other approaches to try to reduce that burden have led to these other niche preserving algorithms. So even within the fitness methods, fitness clearing is still kind of burdensome because you have to figure out which individuals are closer to which other individuals. So that requires pairwise comparisons, calculating distances between every individual and every other individual. But fitness clearing, at least, does it in a simpler way, where you just have one individual is selected as the head of that niche, but all the other individuals are just cleared. Their fitness is set equal to 0. And there are modified clearing approaches that try to do things that are more clever with those ones that get cleared rather than just throwing them totally out. But it's the same basic idea. Now, one downside of all of these is even if you can make them slightly more efficient, you're not going to make them that much more efficient because they're probably going to have to calculate all these pairwise distances. But you also have this hyperparameter, so some notion of a niche size. So without knowing much about your fitness function or your objective functions, you need to sort of guess this hyperparameter, which kind of defines how far away you think these peaks might be. So if you define it too small, and your peaks are very broad, so if you have these broad peaks in this fitness function, and you define these neighborhoods as being pretty small, then you're still going to get individuals that can coexist on a peak. So you kind of want to calibrate these niche sizes to what you expect to be the rough size of the peaks of this fitness function. But you may not know that for your optimization objective. And so it ends up being a hyperparameter you have to tune, and sort of it's kind of a headache. So that's what brings us into these selection-based methods and archival methods and population structure methods. And so these end up being the things that you see incorporated more often in modern algorithms, where things kind of started up here. All right, yeah.
Kind of a funny question. Why not just use a GA to find the peak size?
Well, that's what hyperheuristics do. So that's this hyperparameter here. You can manually tune that, but that's exactly what people often do is apply a hyperheuristic, which sometimes is a GA. But you can but that's the hierarchy. That your metaheuristic helps you find your solution, but then the parameters of the metaheuristic, you can use another metaheuristic to help find them. So that is the common pattern. Okay, so let's go on and see a couple of these other ones here. So crowding ends up being more popular than clearing. The difference between NSGA 1 and NSGA 2 is they moved from a clearing algorithm to a crowding algorithm, and that made the algorithm require fewer parameters, and it made it a more efficient algorithm. So this crowding there are two crowdings that we're going to talk about here, two classes of crowding, one that applies to multi-objective, the other that applies to multimodal. In both cases, their general idea is that rather than coming up with a size, a niche size, they're just going to somehow penalize through the selection operator individuals who are more closely clumped to other individuals than those that are more sparsely spread out. And so in the multi-objective case, then the way this is often done is within each objective, you calculate how far apart individuals are in that kind of objective space, and you add all those distances together. So let me walk through that. So the idea in a Pareto ranking algorithm is that you want to spread things out within ranks. You want to get to the highest rank, so you want to get as close to the Pareto frontier as possible. But then among those on the frontier, or in your current estimate of the non-dominated set, you want to spread them out. So you're going to be applying this within a rank, so within the non-dominated individuals. So after you rank all the individuals, you calculate crowding distances. So for each rank, so we're going to imagine there are M individuals in our current rank. So we can imagine this is the set of non-dominated individuals right now. There are M of those right now. We have no other way to sort them. We just know that nothing dominates them. So for each objective, because remember, this is a multi-objective optimization, we are going to, for those M individuals, we're going to sort those rank R, those M rank R individuals by that objective. So just within that rank, within that objective, we have sorted things in this way. So that individual 1 here is the best if we're maximizing in objective K. Individual M is the worst in objective K. So we just sort them so their neighbors are the next best when the next worst. All right, now we calculate a crowding distance. If you happen to be on the edge here, then you get a crowding distance of infinity. So what we're going to end up, it's going to be good to have a high crowding distance. That means that you are relatively far from your next closest neighbors. And so by assigning a crowding distance of infinity, we're going to tell the selection operator to never get rid of these, that these are important, we want to keep them there. Individuals on the edges for a particular objective, you should always keep. If there are individuals that are close to them, you should get rid of those ones. But you want to maximize the spread along objectives. So if you're at the edges, then you're going to assign them infinite crowding distance in order to keep them. For all of the other individuals, then you calculate a crowding distance which accumulates over all of these, because you do this over every objective. And so for every individual, it participates in one of these for every objective. And what you add to its accumulating crowding distance is this formula, which is just going to be the distance between its next best neighbor and next worst neighbor, divided by a normalization factor, which is the very best we have in the set and the very worst we have in the set. So this gives us a number between 0 and 1, and that normalized neighbor distance gets added to the crowding distance for this individual, and that just accumulates across these objectives so that after you do all of this across your 20 objectives or 5 objectives or 3 objectives, whatever it is, every individual is going to have a crowding distance. So with that, now we remember those crowding distances, and if we do a tournament selection, so that's what I mean by TS, if you happen to pull up individuals with the same rank, so they're in the same kind of distance from the Pareto frontier, then you break ties in the tournament selection with crowding distance, preferring the higher crowding distance over the lower crowding distance. And that's the idea here. So every time you go through the algorithm, you calculate fitnesses first, or characters first, traits first. And once you have your list of traits, objective values, then you calculate crowding distances. And then once you have these crowding distances, then you do tournament selection. And so remember, tournament selection chooses random individuals from the population and it pits them against each other. And in tournament selection, the first thing that will win the tournaments is rank. So if you happen to get a non-dominated individual versus a dominated individual, the non-dominated individual will win that tournament, and it will then be put into the parent pool, which will seed the next generation. But if you happen to grab two of the same rank, two non-dominated individuals or two dominated individuals that have the same domination rank, then we break that tie using the crowding distance, where the individual that has more space around them is going to end up being the individual that wins that tie. Question?
Is it because like the worst for an objective? Like, why do we want to essentially give it a benefit in?
That's a great question. Remember that this is ranked in a single objective sense. So in the multi-objective sense, just because it's bad in one objective could mean that it's good in another objective. So remember that on the Pareto frontier, if we have objective 1 and objective 2 here, and we have a frontier down this way, then there could be an individual at this end. And that individual is going to be really good in objective 1, but it'll be really bad in objective 2. So we're counting on the domination ranking, enforcing that these individuals are good in an objective sense, and now we're just finding a way to spread them. So we're separating those two processes out. Pareto ranking will make sure that if you're bad in one objective, you're probably good in another objective. And then of all of the individuals that are in the same Pareto rank as you, this then helps spread them out. And of all the individuals that are in that Pareto rank as you, if you happen to be on the edge of one objective, we want to keep you, regardless of whether you're on the good side or the bad side. Because if you're on the bad side and within all individuals on that Pareto rank, you're probably on the good side of another objective relative to all of those other individuals in that rank. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Would all the individuals on the frontier would have the same Pareto rank? Is that correct?
Yeah, they would have the top Pareto rank. Mm-hmm. And then behind it, so you can imagine that that there'd be like these sort of almost concentric diamonds or something, so that or concentric circles of rank. So this would be the Pareto frontier, and this would be the ones just that were dominated only by them. This is one dominated by 2, this is dominated by 3, and so on. I saw a hand over here earlier too.
So, sorry, I forgot my question.
All right, okay. If it comes back. So this is how crowding is implemented in a multi-objectives case to break ties within ranks. And that hopefully then spreads things out. This is what an SCGA 2 does as an improvement over fitness sharing. The nice thing about the question?
Yeah. Does this also ensure that we don't stop at a suboptimal frontier? Does this both push us out towards the frontier and across the frontier?
The pushing it out is the Pareto ranking,
right?
And then pushing it. So this is just enforcing spread,
right?
So it's not. I wouldn't. It's an interesting idea. Like, what does it mean to be a suboptimal in like a multi-objective sense?
Right, because you assume that the Pareto frontier could basically row in a sense.
Well, I mean, the Pareto frontier, the thought is that Pareto frontiers, like if these are all feasible, Pareto frontiers are often created by constraints, hidden constraints, like physical constraints. Like it is just impossible to go beyond this. So, so you keep moving closer and closer to the frontier, but it's actually impossible to ever jump over the frontier. The frontier is sort of defined as the best you could possibly go in the mixture of these two objectives. And so the Pareto ranking is going to hopefully keep that pressure on you so that if there are solutions that dominate this solution, if we just find them, they'll be selected for and they'll be kept. But what this is then doing is saying that if we happen to have a bunch of opportunities to keep a bunch, like if this is the Pareto frontier, if there's a bunch that happen to be in the same region of the Pareto frontier, and you happen to have another one that's over here, we want to keep this one, but we want to kill some of these and free up that space to further explore.
Yeah, and so I guess my question is that the individuals are not necessarily on the theoretical Pareto frontier, right? They could be slightly below
Absolutely
theoretical. So how do you ensure that you're also pushing the individuals?
That's the Pareto ranking. So this is the second step. The first step, the Pareto ranking, coming up with this rank, that selecting on the ranking is what, so
They'll use the best individuals, they'll cross over, and then they might get closer to the theoretical.
that's right. And so by selecting on Pareto rank, you are guaranteeing that for your best estimate, like you have, like for all you know, the real Pareto frontier is this dotted line, but so far you've only discovered these individuals. Right. There are individuals out here, but for these individuals, these are your best estimate of the Pareto frontier. Right. So we're going to make sure they make it into the parent pool, and these ones we're going to kill off, and then their empty space will end up being room for these ones' offspring. And that will give us a general pressure in this direction. The problem is all of these have effectively the same fitness, and so we have no way to keep things spread out. And so that's what this additional pressure is doing, is to saying, as you're moving this way, we're going to have additional pressure moving this way. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so when it's written for each rank R, so should we start from the low rank to high rank or high rank to low rank?
For this algorithm, it's not going to matter because it's not like calculating one rank. Now, it shouldn't matter because you partition everyone. Like you can only be in one rank. So if there was like an opportunity to reuse these distances and further rank calculations, there might be some argument as to why you want to start with one over another. But the idea here is that you for each rank, you consider only individuals with that rank. So once you move to the next rank, you're always going to be looking at a next set of individuals. And this here is only individuals of that rank. So there's no interaction between the ranks.
When you say that we push the individual from one rank to another rank so that it ends up into the Pareto frontier?
From generation to generation. That's but this is within a generation. As you're iterating through at the top of a generation, you calculate fitnesses, you calculate these crowding distances, you do your tournament selection. Your tournament selection will be what helps you decide who the next generation is. Hopefully that will then march up. Question?
Does this work with Pareto frontiers that have cavity? It seems like it would.
The spreading is fine. So the Pareto ranking works with non-convex Pareto frontiers. And this is meant to address the diversity issues with Pareto ranking. So because Pareto ranking creates this degeneracy where it's possible to have a huge number of individuals with one rank, then you have this problem that drift and other forces will gradually over time make that more and more, like they'll just coalesce around a random one of those. And so this is just trying to provide that pressure to keep them apart and to spread them out. And it doesn't matter what shape they're in, because once their rank is calculated, that, like the underlying geometry is sort of caught up already in the rank. Yeah.
How do you calculate the distance for say it's a car and you have three phenotypes, acceleration, top speed, and the sound, how loud it is in decibels. So you have kilometers per hour, miles per hour, acceleration is miles per hour, whatever I think.
Well, each one of those, this distance is only relative to one of those at a time. Gesundheit. So you're like max acceleration, that would be one objective. Speed would be another objective, and the other one would be the third objective here. So you iterate through each objective and you add. So in this normalization here, it gets rid of the units. Because like this will be in speed units and this will be in speed units. So this will be a dimensionless quantity between 0 and 1.
Would the how about like units that are on a different scale, which is why I took decibel, because it's on a log scale instead of.
Well, it's still, I mean, regardless of like the point here is that this max and this min will have the same units as these two. So it doesn't matter what type of units those are, is that the crowding distance is still going to add. I mean, this is going to tell you the max, like if it was a sound pressure level, this will tell you the full spread of those sound pressure levels. And this will tell you the sound pressure of, the loudness of this vehicle and the loudness of this vehicle. So this is the next quietest vehicle, the next loudest vehicle, and this is the difference between them. And that difference is going to be less than this difference. So this number will be between 0 and 1. And then those are what get added up. So this might be 0.3 for this objective, it might be 0.7 for the next objective, it might be 0.1 for the next objective. And for that individual, it accumulates, and that gives a approximation of how much is the volume of space around it. So that's all this is really estimating, is that this individual is living in, if it's in a three-dimensional space, it can be spread apart from individuals in this dimension, in this dimension, and in this dimension. So it's sort of estimating the volume of space around that individual. It's sort of ugly, but imagine a cube. So every individual has got a rectangle that they're sitting in, and this hypervolume that it's sort of trying to estimate here, and it's kind of, so it'll be proportional to that. I mean, it's not going to scale in volume, but you're still adding up like it's a little bit like an L1 norm. So you're adding up the distance in this dimension, the distance in this dimension, and the distance in this dimension, and you're normalizing them all to their local dimensional scale, and hopefully that spread. So if you have a very large spread here, but the total spread is really, really, really big, then it helps to normalize for that. So that's what's going on.
Then it's a Euclidean distance between car 1 and car 2. You had the value 0.3, 0.7, 0.2 or something like that. That's car 1. And car 2 would be some other numbers.
Well, there's no, I mean, this is just, I mean, there's no, the only distance calculation here is this is, I mean, that's not really a distance because it's signed, but this is just between the next loudest and the next quietest car. This is the range of those values, and that's it. So there's no like as the crow flies distance or anything like that. Like we're not calculating any vector between individuals. We're just summing up what's, if you've got these two neighbors, how far apart are they? You've got these two neighbors, how far apart are they? You've got these two neighbors, how far apart are they? So we're going to sum up this normalized distance, and this normalized distance. And so you can think of this as unidirectional distances. So all of the, it doesn't really matter what norm you use because we're going to sort them so that this is always a positive number on the numerator and it's only in one dimension. So we just add up one dimension at a time. Yeah.
So if we were to prioritize certain objectives, that will be taken care of in the RAM computation itself, right?
Right. And ideally you wouldn't prioritize in a multi-objective optimization. We try not to do any prioritization ahead of time. In fact, there's no way to do it. Like, so if you have objectives F1 and F2, and you could say, well, I'm just going to replace F2 with 5 times F2. Well, it turns out that that the way Pareto ranking works, or the way multi-objective optimization works, the absolute scale of the objectives doesn't matter because they're not being added together. So you've increased the value of F2 by multiplied by 5, but still the ideal position for F2 stays the same. It's just you've increased its trait value by 5, but still where you achieve the highest trait value is still the same. So, so that will end up giving you, eventually you converge to a frontier, and then after you see all the points on that frontier, then you can start making decisions about, well, what matters to you more? And if somebody says F2 matters to you more, then you're gonna suggest solutions from this side. If somebody says F1 matters to you more, you'll suggest solutions from this side. But that's all sort of built into the Pareto ranking, the Pareto frontier. This is just a behind-the-scenes mechanism to try to explore the frontier.
So the weighting can change the Pareto frontier, right?
No. Weighting changes if you use a weighted linearization, a scalarization, as your mechanism to find the Pareto frontier. Then what weights you choose will, like, so what that would look like if you have F1 and F2, you could say, I want to choose I'm going to start out with a subproblem where I think F1 is more important to me than F2. Then what that's going to do is you'll start with individuals here and you'll gradually move along this rail until you can't get any further along it and you stop at some optimal point here. That will be a sample of the frontier. But in order for you to fill out the whole frontier, then you'll need to reset the problem and try a different set of weights and then redo that. And then so then you'll eventually run that subproblem and you'll get another one of these squares where it didn't stop. If you connect all those squares, then you hopefully get an estimate of the Pareto frontier. Now, it turns out this particular method doesn't work for non-convex frontiers, and so you end up losing some things. But that's, the weights don't change the frontier, the weights change. The weights are almost a coordinate that locates you on the frontier. All right. Good, all right, so that's crowding for multi-objective. We can also define crowding for multimodal. So the way we're going to do that is, so we don't have ranks anymore. We don't, because we only have one objective. But we still want to penalize things that happen to fall next to each other. So what we're going to do is n over 2 times, so this is our population, we are going to adjust the selection approach. So we select 2 parents, P1 and P2, and with no replacements. So P2 is a unique parent from P1. And then we're going to cross over those 2 parents to create 2 offspring, C1 and C2, and then we'll mutate them. So we just did basically crossover and mutation from 2 random parents that we've selected from. Okay, now crowding has to do with which of those 4 individuals do we keep. So that's the idea here, is that we had 2 individuals, we created 2 more individuals. There's only room in the population for 2 individuals total. Now that we have these 4 individuals, who gets to stay? And we're going to prioritize high fitness, and we're going to prioritize high fitness among the closest individuals. So what do I mean by that? So for deterministic crowding, then what we're going to use here, and this is kind of a triangle inequality thing, because that was supposed to be, let me undo that. The eraser was a little more ambitious than I wanted it to be. Okay, so if statement here. So this, again, is supposed to look like a triangle inequality. All of this thing is, if you read through that, all this is saying is that in this condition, the C1 prime offspring, the mutated C1 prime offspring, is closer or most similar to parent 1. And the C2 prime offspring is most similar to parent 2. That's all this statement is saying here. And so in that case, we are going to pit parent 1 against child 1 and parent 2 against child 2. So if the fitness of child 1 is greater than the fitness of parent 1, we get rid of parent 1 and replace it with child 1. If the fitness of child 2 is greater than parent 2, replace parent 2 with child 2. So we figure out of these 4 individuals, which parent is the child most similar to, and then do a tournament between the parent and child. So it's a parent-offspring conflict. So the else here is just the flip of that. So if it happens to be that child 2 is closer to parent 1, then that's the tournament that we do. So then child 2 competes with parent 1 and child 1 competes with parent 2. That's deterministic crowding. It's a tournament between the most similar parent and offspring. Questions about that? So we updated our selection operator so that every time any selection operator that's out there for your multimodal, at the point in which it goes out and grabs 2 parents and it does crossover and mutation, then this is how you decide which offspring and parents you're going to keep. And so you arrange them by similarity and then do a tournament among the most similar. Yeah.
This is between 2 parents of similar fitness.
This is, well, so like we've already done, so remember the fitness sharing ones, those are we're modifying fitness. This approach to diversity preservation is we're leaving fitness alone and we're modifying selection. So fitness has already happened, and so there you have used some logic to say it is time to call the selection operator. So yes, it will be about fitness. And so you have sorted, I mean, again, so you've seen lots of different ways you can organize the GAs, but you can imagine one narrative is you've sorted everybody by fitness, you've decided that these individuals are the individuals who get a chance to actually produce offspring. And so of the subset of high fitness individuals, you call the selection operator on 2 of those.
So you do matchmaking.
Doing matchmaking among, and I said N here, where I say N is the whole population, but this could be a subset of your high fitness individuals as well. But the point is we're modifying the selection, we're modifying a tournament selection operator so that the tournaments end up being between parent and offspring. As opposed to when we talked about tournament selection before, it's been about who sort of gets an opportunity. It's like we'll do a tournament to say who gets to become a parent. And we'll say this potential parent versus this potential parent, see who's got higher fitness, and we'll push them up. Here, we're doing it a little bit differently, where we're doing the tournaments after the offspring are produced, and we're doing the tournaments between parent and offspring. The idea here is that theoretically, most of the time, when you do crossover and mutation, you're going to produce offspring that have a high probability of being close to parents. And that's exactly what we don't want in crowding. So if we happen to produce an offspring that's close to a parent, then if it has a higher fitness, we just replace the parent with it and have it move closer or further up its fitness peak. So rather than producing, if we have a fitness peak here, if a parent was here, so we'll call that parent, and if we have the offspring here, rather than now having both of these, we say, well, these 2 are so similar with each other, we're just going to do a tournament among them, kill off the parent, and then keep the offspring. Now we've moved further up the hill, and we don't have the crowding of these 2. That's what we're trying to do. Questions about that? Yeah.
Forgive me, what's the difference between multimodal and multi-objective optimization?
In multimodal, you only have one fitness objective, so you have f of x, and but it has lots and lots of peaks. And so global optimization is sort of just like, let's just find the highest. But in multimodal optimization, we're saying rather than trying to cluster all 1,000 of our individuals on the one peak, let's then spread them out so that we can maybe find some of these alternative peaks too. And why would you do that? It turns out that in multimodal optimization is actually does a better job at global optimization because it forces individuals to go out and find more peaks so they don't all collapse at one peak. So it helps maintain exploration, but then also sometimes stakeholders like to hear about alternative solutions that have similar fitness. Okay. So, so children replace the most similar parent if they're better. This assumes that the offspring is similar enough to be in the same niche. So this is a problem with deterministic crowding. What if you create an offspring that happens to fall on a slightly different peak, but is still closest to its parent? What do I mean by that? So this is the nightmare scenario for deterministic crowding. You have a multimodal objective like this one, and you had your parent was sort of owned this peak, the other parent owned this peak. You did a crossover between these two parents, it produced these intermediate offspring, which happened to fall on their own peaks. So ideally, we now would like to keep all of these, but what we're going to end up doing is putting these two will end up being in a tournament with each other. And the winner of that tournament, in this case, it happens to be the parent, but it could be the offspring, is going to completely lose this newly discovered niche. So this problem of niche loss is the reason why deterministic crowding is a little too crude. Does that make sense? So the idea here, if you pit parent against offspring, you're assuming parent and offspring are on the same peak, and so pitting them against each other reduces crowding. But there's that possibility that parent and offspring will be on different peaks, and by getting rid of, and if you've now discovered a new peak, the offspring is the only one on that peak. And now instead of finding a new mode, which is the whole point, you've now destroyed that mode and you have to rediscover it in other ways, which is wasteful.
Wouldn't elitism solve that?
Elitism applies usually at a different layer. Well, so also elitism, we don't worry about elitism with multimodal because the population itself sort of takes the place of the elites because you kind of remember all of the past peaks in the population. You maybe could have another set of elites, but hopefully you have enough individuals that the highest peaks will always end up being populated, so you don't need the elitism. But and also this peak that we're losing is not the highest fitness peak. So any sort of notion of elitism, like this guy that you've discovered, is not better than this guy you already knew about. And so it doesn't necessarily get added to the elites. So that's and it doesn't necessarily, C1 might have been here. It may not have been at the very top of this peak. And so you've now lost the ability to explore this peak. That's the problem. That's the niche loss. Okay, so what do we do? One approach is probabilistic crowding. So rather than 100% of the time replacing the highest fitness individual or replacing the lowest fitness individual with the highest fitness individual, you do a tiny little proportional selection between the two individuals. So you take the fitness of the of one individual divided by the total fitness of the two individuals, and you replace individual Y with this probability. So individual Y has got fitness Y, individual X has got fitness X. So if individual X's fitness is much greater than Y's fitness, there'll be a high probability that Y will get killed and X will replace it, and vice versa. And so this softens it a little bit in that if they're close in fitness, there is a lower probability of niche loss from that newly discovered niche from the crossover. So it helps it a little bit, but it's not perfect. All right, so we want to go into a different approach, a better approach than this, that blends from fitness sharing and from crowding in order to give us something that's efficient and works really well and is very unlikely to generate niche loss. But any question about these problems, this niche loss problem and why we care about it? Yeah.
if it's multi-objective optimization, but not multi-modal, would this not really be as much of an issue?
Yeah, this type of crowding is really focused on multimodal optimization. The crowding that we talked about before, where we sorted everything by ranks or whatever, is the one, the crowding that we focus on for multi-objective. Yeah. Okay, so the selection-based approach that ends up being used now, it's the kind of the most popular one now, which resolves a lot of these issues, is RTS, restricted tournament selection. So the motivation here is we're going to pay a little extra cost to ensure the tournaments are actually between the most similar individuals, rather than sort of assuming that parent and offspring are the most similar individuals to each other. We're going to do a little bit of a search. Now, we don't want to do a search over all individuals. Like, so in the most costly case, you produce a new offspring, and then you want to do a tournament to see if this offspring deserves to stay around. Well, you could compare this offspring to every other individual and say, does this offspring have better fitness than any individual that's out there? And if it does, then we keep this offspring. If it doesn't, we kill this offspring. But that requires then calculating, doing these tournaments among all of these individuals. So how do we reduce that cost? And so the idea here is we've got, the same as before, we've got two parents, we produce two mutated offspring, or two offspring, let's call it that. And then we have a hyperparameter, which is a window size, a number of individuals. This is lower than the population size. So we create a randomly drawn subset of the population called W. And so there is a little w window size, which is the hyperparameter, which will affect how costly restricted tournament selection is. If W is small, then it will pay very little cost. If W is equal to the whole population size, this makes this and gives it an n squared cost. So inside this population window, we are going to find the individuals, the subset of the population. So our random subset of the population W. Among those, let's find the individual who's most similar to offspring A prime, and most similar to offspring B prime. And we're going to call that most similar individual A double prime and B double prime. And we're going to run tournaments among those. So rather than generating offspring and assuming that the parents are most similar and then doing the tournament among the parents, we're going to say, let's search over a subset of the population to find individuals that are similar to our new offspring. And then we do a tournament selection between our offspring and the existing individual that in our subset that is most similar to each one of those offspring. And that hopefully should reduce the chance of competition between peaks. Because if an offspring falls on a peak, then hopefully that if there's another individual on that peak, we will find that individual, compete with them, and one of them is going to go away, but the peak will remain. There's still a possibility that A double prime will be on another peak, in which case that peak might be higher and might be lower, and it kind of degenerates into a kind of a probabilistic choice of which one you keep, so it looks a little bit more like probabilistic crowding. But most of the time, this focuses the effort on what we really care about, the crowding problem. Because if you happen to produce an offspring on a peak that happens to already have another individual there, even if the parent of that offspring is elsewhere, it's silly to compete these two against each other when you have an opportunity to compete these against each other. But in order to figure out that this one exists, you need to go through and calculate distances between this new offspring and every other individual in the population. And that's really costly. So that's why restricted tournament selection randomly selects W of those and then only calculates distances to those random subset. Yeah.
So it's always just like randomly from all of them, so including the parents. So it's not guaranteed that the parents are in that set of people.
That's right. Yeah, it's just from the whole population, the full population, including the parents. but not including those offspring. So we've got the new offspring are over here, the whole population over there, a random subset, and then of that random subset, those are the ones that are eligible to be paired with these offspring. Yeah.
What if we maintain buckets like over the entire domain of it, we maintain bucket and store the average bucket fitness in a table and then we compare that fitness to the fitness of an individual?
Store the average,
Of the average fitness of the bucket in a table or something.
I would have to, standing here, my brain works a lot more slowly, slower than it would if I was sitting at a desk. But what I will say is that there are data structures that help speed up these things that behind the scenes are doing a little bit of what like you're talking about. So
Can I show you?
I don't want to spend too because I want to make sure we're serious, but I would say that I'm saying that there are other ways you could do these things, and and ways of caching fitness scores, caching distances. You could definitely do those too. So I'm just sort of covering the basics here, but there are absolutely other optimizations that you can do in terms of keeping track of fitness, keeping track of distances. The distances is the biggest thing. And so, a lot of agent-based modeling tools, they behind the scenes try to keep track of relative positions of all of the different agents so that if they have to do neighborhood calculations, they can do them very quickly because they've remembered them from the last time they did neighborhood calculations. So they sort of update their neighborhoods only as needed, and then that becomes a memory footprint that helps speed up these calculations. I'm assuming that none of those optimizations are there, and but there are definitely more things you can do.
Yeah, I was just gonna say like there are methods like speciation and stuff like that, which just maintain it throughout and don't have to do the whole recalculation each time. So maybe those things can.
Yeah, right. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about something like speciation, but yes, there are. I mean, so RTS is a general tool that can be used across large populations. You see it being invoked in a lot of different algorithms, but yeah, you can make bigger problems into smaller problems, and then that way it sort of has a similar effect. Where if you do need to search among individuals, they're all partitioned off into little subpopulations, so you end up getting a smaller search there. So we will see something like that come up here at the very end of this unit. Yeah.
Could you explain how you're getting the population window W again?
So this is little w size is a hyperparameter which is just set by the person running the algorithm, and then you draw randomly from the end individuals until you have W random individuals, and that's what your big W window is. So you just draw uniformly over all individuals without replacement, and that ends up giving you a random subset of these. If you want to think algorithmically, imagine you've got a vector that counts up from 1 all the way up to n, and then you take a random permutation of that vector. So now it's like 4, 1, n, 6, or whatever, and then you chop that random permutation to only have the first W members, and then these will be the indices of the individuals that are in your big W set. Okay, so that's restricted tournament selection. The nice thing about it is that little w that I just talked about there, that's an efficiency knob. You crank it up, and then you're going to be doing n squared, searches. So every new offspring is going to need to look at every other individual to see who's closest to it before doing the tournaments. You crank that thing down, and you just get a random individual, and now you're just doing a random pairing of the offspring with some random individual in the population. So you get better crowding when W is large, but you get a more efficient algorithm when W is small. That's why people like RTS. Okay, so those are all of our selection-based methods. So we altered fitness, we altered selection. I mentioned you can also do an archival approach. And so just going to mention one as an example, but there are other ways you can do this. This is known as the Species Conservation GA or the SCGA. And here you've got a hyperparameters species distance, which is a little bit like a niche size that you have to set. And you're going to start with an empty set of so-called conserved species. So this is like a IUCN Red Book list of species that you definitely want to protect. And you start out with that being empty. And so this is a little bit like a more sophisticated version of elitism. So then you're going to rank all of your individuals in terms of fitness. So this could be multi-objective fitness or multimodal fitness. So single objective fitness or multi-objective fitness. Starting with the highest rank, then you're going to add individuals to your protected set if there's no other individual within your species distance divided by 2. So there's this radius of this that you want to maintain. So initially it's empty, and so the highest ranking individual in your fitness gets added to your protected species. But then the next ranking individual, if they happen to be close to that individual, they don't get added to the list that's protected. So the next one that gets added to the protected might be very low in fitness because that's the first one you hit that's far enough away from the first one that you added. So you're keeping track of these individuals that hopefully are high fitness, but are all separated from each other by this species distance hyperparameter. Then you perform your GA on the population after you copy in the members of the conserved species list into the generation. So this conserved species list, again, it's like elitism, it stays in there, but then those individuals then always become members of the population because they're conserved. And then that allows them to adjust the generation of new individuals so that you hopefully maintain that diversity over time. So it's just elitism with an anti-crowding distance. And that builds up a memory of these cluster centers that anchor and archive the niches in these habitats. So that's an example of doing niche preservation with kind of an intelligent elitism that has this hyperparameter for that, you have to tune that, what should that be? That sort of depends on your optimization objective. So that's a very different approach to niche preservation, this archival or elitism-based approach. You don't have to memorize SCGA. I'm just trying to put it up there to show that there are other ways that you can take elitism and add things that make it more about diversity preservation, not just keeping the best. Yep.
The disadvantage is taking more memory.
Yeah, I mean, there's more computational resources. There's more. I mean, so that's I think the next. So and there are memory footprints for each one of these things. But there's also computational footprints as well.
Yeah, I was just asking, was the previous one more computationally expensive, and this one is memory?
Well, remember, this one has got sorting involved that the others don't. So you have to pay costs of sorting and you have the memory. So, we're going to get to the scaling on the next slide. All right, so overall, these are our niche preservation methods that we've talked about. We have the fitness-based methods. So these are all kind of inspired by fitness sharing. We also had clearing and modified clearing. And then clustering, we talked about that too, which was sort of trying to be a more efficient sharing. And so the worst scaling individual is sharing. It's got this in the squared because you have to keep doing these pairwise comparisons. You can cut down on those pairwise comparisons by using clustering. And so that's why you've got this instead. So the number of clusters ends up being what scales so it's not, you only care about the distance between the clusters and everybody else, not everybody and everybody else. So you can kind of work through the logic here, but you can see that there are, sharing is kind of the worst. Clearing is maybe not as bad. Modified clearing ends up being just as bad as sharing. So, but then if we go down into selection-based methods, then we see a major improvement in scaling. So now instead of scaling with n log n everywhere or n squared everywhere, you start seeing a lot more linear scaling or scaling that is a little bit more configurable. So crowding distance, because there's sorting involved, you got an n log n that shows up there. Deterministic and probabilistic crowding, you're just selecting among individuals, and so you only have linear scaling. And then RTS looks a little bit like sharing, but you can choose how many individuals that you are comparing with. So the size of this W, where this W can scale all the way to n and make this n squared, or it can go all the way down to W and make this n, then you have a lot of control over how costly this is. And then that last one we just talked about, SCGA, because there's sorting involved, it depends on the particular conditions of your optimization objective, but it's somewhere between n log n and n squared, because you've got this kind of sort and compare with subset problem going on. So the point I'm trying to get here is that there are a bunch of different scaling. You have to consider scaling whenever you come up with a new approach for diversity preservation, because this is per iteration. So every iteration, so you've got lots of individuals and lots of iterations. And so you might come up with a really clever diversity preservation approach. But if it is super costly and you have to pay that cost per iteration, it never will work. And so that I don't want to say you don't need to actually memorize these, but I'm just trying to say there is diversity in scaling. And that's what is sort of drives the market here. And that's a big reason why RTS has become so popular of a method for diversity preservation. It's easy to implement. There are parallelization opportunities. It's easy to configure how costly it is. It's got this nice hyperparameter. It's relatively easy to interpret. And so a lot of methods just use RTS because it's easiest to use and it generally isn't a terrible solution, as opposed to some of these other more clever, but sometimes very costly approaches. All right, any questions about that? And the big thing here is I want you to know, roughly speaking, you can modify fitness in ways that kind of are IFD-like. You can do crowding distance, which are sort of modifications of tournament selection to penalize individuals that are close to other individuals, or you can come up with lists of individuals that are sort of your sort of self-organized list of niche centers that you're keeping track of. So those are three major approaches. They're going to differ in complexity, and so that's why a lot of people just converge on RTS. Okay. All right, so I had mentioned before, and this is a nice way to pivot into our next unit too, but that there is a fourth approach, and it's population structuring or island. So we've mentioned NMOEA-D. The D here stands for decomposition. It decomposes a multi-objective problem into several one-objective subproblems, but it does it in a way that is immune to the problems with non-convex Pareto frontiers. There is very little gene flow between these subproblems. And that ends up helping with your diversity preservation because each one of these islands maintains its own identity. And so NSGA3 does something similar. It was sort of inspired by this. But point here, islands kind of pre-partition the Pareto frontier and then maintain those islands' identity throughout throughout how long the algorithm runs. So in multimodal, there are approaches like this too, where you can get islands with little interaction. So if you think about multimodal in general, gradually each one of these peaks sort of becomes its own little GA that is sort of kind of isolated here. And this helps lower fitness islands maintain some representation because once you get too many individuals at a high fitness island, they stop going to that island. And so it creates a little bit of isolation. This works really well when you have a large population size and very few peaks. But the question is, what about the other case where you have a lot of peaks and a small population size? We saw that AFPO utilized the diversity preservation possible in multi-objective optimization to make for a better searcher, right? Something that could keep individuals around for longer and find some of these other peaks. So can we, use more generically, find a way to use islanding to similarly be leveraged to create a team of mostly independent but periodically communicating individuals? So that's kind of the last topic we have here in our GA unit, is this idea of distributed genetic algorithms, or DGAs. So DGAs are this idea that rather than running one GA, I divide my individuals up into small subpopulations and run little GAs mostly independently, with just a tiny bit of migration between. So I've got my whole population, and I randomly assort, a little bit like Vega did, but more permanent, is that I then divide those up into these little independent groups, which mostly reproduce within each other. So we call them Ds. So these are closely related individuals, typically only breeding within the group. So you separate these up into multiple Ds, and then you just run a simple GA on each one of these subpopulations. You could do this in parallel, you could do this sequentially. Abstractly, logically, they're split up, but there is opportunities for you to say, I'm going to put this on one processor, this on another processor. GAs are also nice for GPUs. As long as your fitness function is not like a simulation. So you can parallelize things across GPUs if your fitness objective is like doesn't have any contingencies, any branching or whatever. If it's basically the same calculation just for a different input, then that's exactly what GPUs are built for. You load you say, I want 1,000 GPUs all run to the same function, but they all start with different inputs, and then they can march those things along in parallel, and they do that very, very fast. And you can do that with GAs. And so you can do, so there's a bunch of ways you can split this up, but I'm not focusing on the parallel aspect of it here. I'm focusing on the population structure here, which could be done sequentially as well. Might be you do this team, then this team, then this team, then this team, and you go back to this one. And internally on the computer, you're still running them in sequence, but abstractly, there are 4 parallel Ds that are running these separate GAs, almost independently. Then every once in a while, you take a high fitness individual from one D and you migrate it to another D and have it replace a low fitness individual or a random individual. Don't do that very often, but you do it periodically. And that's the nature of DGAs, is that you've got these little independent units solving their own optimization problem, periodically sharing. And the thought is maybe this will preserve diversity in a little more forced way that might improve global optimization and multimodal optimization. But the question is why? So this is sort of a thought that maybe this will work, but do we have any confidence it will work? What conceptual models do we have that helps us understand what's going on here? So does everybody understand the basic lineup here? We're going to just, instead of running one GA, you run 4 sub-GAs, and you periodically, if they're running for 1,000 generations, maybe every 50th generation, you migrate between GAs, a couple of individuals. Yeah.
Would like the population originally split up, or do they start identically first?
So there could be different approaches for that. We can say, to be simple, imagine that you've got your decision space and you draw a bunch of individuals close to each other, put them in one team, and then another. So I've got 100 individuals. I'm going to draw 25 with a normal distribution in my decision space centered at a particular point, and the next 25 from another normal centered at another point, and so on. So they'll be genetically similar to each other. Yeah.
This won't guarantee you'll get any optimal. You won't get any control over the objectives?
Well, the objectives are fixed, and so you can imagine this is just single objective.
Yeah, but between the migration, you won't have much control between like, oh, I want this to be favored more than this, right?
Well, there's only one thing you even care about being favored. So there's only one objective function. So the individuals that are very good in that objective, they might also be very good in this population. The only reason they might not, it's about relative advantage. So relative to this, like these might have, this individual right here might have the top speed relative to all of these individuals. And so it ends up being the one that gets migrated to this population. But this population just happens to have really fast individuals. And so even though it had the top speed here, it'll have intermediate speed in these individuals. So it may not do as well in this population, even though it was doing excellent in this population. So what we would hope for is maybe the opposite to occur, is that this highest individual is a really fast individual, will migrate into this one. And these generally are all slower than this population. So that migration introduced now a really high fitness individual that will spread that innovation to these individuals.
This is multimodal or objective?
Multimodal. It's a single objective like speed.
If you continue to mix these, wouldn't you eventually expect them to become like homogeneous?
Yeah, that's going to be, so that's an excellent question, and that's what we're going to get into probably next time, is the metapopulation dynamics here. Under what conditions does this do anything more than just create a big GA? Because if the migration rate is too high, you may as well just do one big GA. Why go pay the extra cost here? In fact, I think that might be one of the first things I sort of say here. For most problems, this is bad to do. It's extra overhead, and you're not going to get anything because at best, these things converge together into one big GA. So are there any set of conditions in which this improves the dynamics of the GA? And if so, why? And so what we're going to get to next time, we'll start out with this next time, is there were some famous theories in population genetics that if you had islanding like this in nature, the thought was you could actually discover higher fitness solutions more often, more frequently. It turns out some of those ideas didn't really work out, but this structure allowed for innovations in the GA that for very, very, very complex fitness functions, this ended up being a better way to sort of distribute resources in the search. So there is a niche where this actually does work better than just a monolithic GA, where a monolithic GA doesn't start with enough diversity. This is a way to sort of pump a huge amount of diversity into your GA up front and maintain it for a long amount of time. And that's what we'll get to next time. All right, thanks guys. If you have any other questions, feel free to come up. Otherwise, we'll see you Thursday.